Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we've got a review of a discontinued, hard to find, expensive now. Didn't used to be expensive, but it is now expensive. Gucci fragrance from the year 2000. And this little bad boy right here is called Gucci Rush for Men. Now, originally this bottle had like a plastic cover on it, but I actually got it from Japan, and I paid very little money for this because it was a partial. And so I've waited and waited and waited to sort of get this fragrance because I heard from friends that it was probably the weakest of the three-headed monster or the holy trinity of masculine perfumes that Tom Ford put out while he was at Gucci. So of course we had the great Gucci Envy for Men, which will get its own review one day. I've got a backup of this as well. Probably my favorite of the three. And very close runner-up would be this little bad boy, which is Gucci Pour Homme from 2003. And you can see how little precious juice I have left. Love these bottles, by the way. Same bottle that Gucci Pour Homme 2 came in. Beautiful black tea fragrance, that one. And so these three, Gucci Envy for Men, Gucci Pour Homme. I don't know if you just heard that, but that was actually the top of Gucci Rush coming off. And I know the great Anuj talked about that this is the shittiest bottle ever created for a fragrance, that it's so cheap. It's all plastic, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I have some things to say about the bottle, because actually this bottle was created in basically put together by the great Tom Ford. So Tom Ford is the designer of this bottle. And while the ingredients themselves may be cheap in the creation of the bottle, you know, this cheap little plastic, this terrible little plate that the glue comes off on and all that stuff, the design of the bottle, I have to kind of give it to him, because I don't know what this sort of reminds you of, but it reminds me of the very early Apple products. So if you think about things like, remember those big white iPads with the little circle thing on the front? The original, sorry, iPod, not iPad. The original iPod. In the early 90s, you would download music on it from, you know, Napster or wherever it was. Or could you do that on your iPod? I can't remember. But I remember just having a ton of music on your iPod, going for a run, and just with your Bluetooth headphones, and you just think you were the coolest thing in the world back then, because, of course, Bluetooth was brand new. iPods were new. And so, yes, it was, I just remember listening to music on my Walkman, on my iPod that replaced the Walkman for hours and hours, just thinking it was the coolest thing, that you didn't have to switch through CDs. God forbid, you didn't have to switch through CDs. But of course, I still switched through CDs in the car at the time. But whenever I was home, no, I was high class then. That went into the Bose docking station or straight to my ears. But that's sort of what it reminds me of. There's this very modern 21st century feel to it, and of course you've got the see-through plastic, the transparent plastic, where you can see how much juice is left. This is a 50 ml bottle, okay? And so the reason I'm reviewing this, you may ask, why are you reviewing this one, Ramsey? Well, I have a thing where I sort of want to take my time on the fragrances I really care about. And so even though this is discontinued, and even though this is a hard to find, expensive discontinued fragrance now, you're going to pay hundreds, 300 maybe, who knows how much you're going to pay for this, 400 maybe. Don't pay that. I'm going to tell you that right off the bat. I don't think this one's worth it. I think this is the weakest of the three-headed monster that came out under Tom Ford. That being said, I don't think it's a bad fragrance, and we'll talk a little bit about the perfume itself, of course, and what I get from it. But you know, the reason that this review is happening today is that it's not one that I really feel like I need to spend a lot of time with, because I know what I want to say. I know the fragrance pretty well. I've worn it a couple times since I got it in from Japan. And so there is very little pressure on me to perform when reviewing this fragrance, because I don't really think it's that good of a fragrance. And so these others, like this, I'm going to have to take my time with. Gucci Envy and of course Gucci Pour Homme, the OG. These two are going to deserve much more time and attention. But Gucci Rush, I can do a quick, easy review off of the way it makes me feel and what I get from it. pretty easily. And I don't feel like there's very much pressure on this one, believe it or not. So that tells you how I really feel about the fragrance right there. Been discontinued for a while. Prices are, like I said, extremely high in the secondary market. But when I first smell this fragrance, and it's actually a pretty simple composition. There's maybe a handful of notes in the fragrance, but the opening of this perfume actually reminds me of a molecule fragrance. So if you've ever smelled something like Giza Schoen's Molecule series, Molecule 01, Molecule 02, all of that stuff, that's sort of what the opening of Rush for Men smells like to me. And the opening is actually one of the best parts of the fragrance, I'll say. So I actually have like a 45-minute dry down right here, and I've got like a 9-hour dry down right here, which I can't even smell, but I do have one. And so, yeah, I can't even smell it. It's completely gone. But here, I've got a 45-minute dry down, and it's starting to turn into that milky, sandalwoody thing, which it ends up turning into later on. So we'll talk a little bit about the progressions here in a minute. But if you know Giza Schoen's molecule fragrances, or if you're a fan of fragrances that are heavy in isoe super, so if you like things like Terre de Hermes, not that this smells anything like Terre, but I'm just saying if you're a fan of synthetic fragrances, if those type of fragrance creations don't bother you, this is a very interesting composition. So it was actually done by two perfumers, Antoine Maisondieu and Daniela Andrier, and they both have hits to their name. Daniela Andrier actually has done things like, I believe she's a German perfumer, if I'm not mistaken. But she did Prada L'Homme, Angelique Noir by Guerlain, which I have a sample of. I need to do a review of. She did Prada L'Homme Intense, which is probably my favorite of the bunch. And she did Prada Amber Pour Homme, probably her best creation right there, amongst other things. I mean, she's been around. She's done a bunch of the Pradas. And so I'll talk more about her, I guess, in the future. Maybe she'll get her own Perfumers portfolio video. And then the other one is Antoine Maisondieu, who did things like Mont Blanc Explorer, the original Armani Code with Antoine Lee, one of my favorite current perfumers, Burberry London for Men, one of my favorite designers that no one talks about. That'll get its own review one of these days. Beau de Jour by Tom Ford. So he's been around the block. He did Fat Electrician, which is one of probably my favorite vetiver fragrance I purchased this year was Fat Electrician. I really like that stuff. Like a nutty vetiver. It's great. And so two, I'm not going to say all-star, but high-level perfumers, let's say, okay? And so this came out in the year 2000, and with that molecule-like opening, there is a lot of woods. You're going to get a lot of these dry, woody, slightly coniferous notes as well because of that very medicinal-smelling cypress. And cypress has this almost slightly wintergreen quality to it. Imagine breathing in on a cold winter day, and you're standing in the middle of a cypress forest. Damn thing keeps falling off. So you're standing in the middle of, I need to get some super glue and super glue this on. So just imagine you're standing in the middle of a cypress forest in the dead of winter, and you take this big deep breath, and you get that, smell of that very unique sort of woody, green, coniferous, almost pine-like smell, if you will. But cypress sort of goes in its own direction as well. And one thing about cypress that you should know is Tom Ford loves cypress, and that's been proven many a times over. His favorite fragrance of all time is Halston Z14, and Halston Z14 has a big cypress note in it. And if you've ever smelled Tom Ford's Italian cypress, which I actually have a review on the channel, if you want my full thoughts on Italian cypress, you can go check out that review. But cypress is a note that I think really inspires Tom Ford, and the fact that he specifically used cypress in this proves it again. And so cypress, like I said, it can have a bit of that coniferous feel, but it can also have a little bit of a smoky-like feel to it. So imagine this sort of green aspect that slightly turns into smoke, but not like a incense-like feel. Incense does come a little bit later, but in a little bit of a different manner, if you will. It comes to the party dressed in different clothes. The incense in this fragrance feels different to my nose than normal, old-school, traditional frankincense fragrances, right? And so what ends up happening is The notes that come to your nose early on are the sort of molecule-like synthetic type, woody notes like Isoe Super and stuff like that. And this sort of smoky medicinal green aspect from the cypress, okay? There's also a little bit of lavender, but the lavender it's almost like you can sense its presence, like you can feel the lavender, but you can't really smell it, if that makes sense, okay? So if you're not a fan of lavender, this is not Caron Pour un Homme from 1934 or anything like that, all right? The lavender here, I think, is more for a rounding effect, and it's almost like you can sense the presence of the lavender. But if you're a lavender hater, I would still urge you to try this perfume, okay? So early on, you're hit with that medicinal, slightly smoky cypress note that's very green, and it's going to come to your nose with a little bit of this pickled sandalwood smell. Just a little bit, all right? I don't want you to think this is Le Labo Santal 33 or anything like that, because it's not at all. And in fact, the sandalwood, as the fragrance continues into its dry down, which unfortunately doesn't last that long, but as the fragrance continues into its dry down, the sandalwood note becomes smoother, and it becomes rounder and more polished, okay? Early on, you're going to smell what smells like a little bit of a Javanol, medicinal, not medicinal, but I would say pickled, slightly harsh sandalwood. And I know everyone talks about just how smooth and milky the sandalwood is in Gucci Rush, and it does turn to that later on. It's a musky, milky sandalwood dry down. And the bottle does a great representation of showing off that white, quality of it. But when you first spray, that's not what comes to my nose. What comes to my nose is a bit of that sort of pickled Javanol synthetic sandalwood, which there's nothing wrong with that at all, because it's mixing with synthetic Isoe Super. And so, this woody, spicy sort of concoction is what you get in the opening, very traditionally masculine. And so what ends up happening, like I said, is the hours tick by, that little bit of a harsh, punchy sandalwood. That's a good word for it, punchy. It's a little sharp on the nose, right? Turns more and more natural as the minutes and hours ultimately end up ticking by. And like I said, unfortunately, the clock on this fragrance is not that long. I only get 5 hours out of it, sometimes 4 to 5 hours, right? And so that is the biggest downside, number one, to this fragrance that I can think about, is that Gucci Rush for Men is not a performer, okay? So if you're somebody who is now used to smelling modern synthetics in your fragrances lasting 12, 15 hours, this is not the fragrance for you if that's sort of your expectation. If the first thing you ask somebody is, what's the sillage and projection on that perfume? This one is not for you. This is a no, because it is very, very soft and quiet. And actually, that leads me to my next point. If you have watched my brother Rich Mitch's review on Gucci Rush for Men, he put up a 5 or 10 minute video on it, just a brief first impression. And what he said is that it feels very quiet. And it does feel very quiet. And I'm not sure if he ended up returning his bottle or if he said it was off or something. But even in mine, it is a quiet fragrance. It absolutely is. It's not a fragrance that is going to... it's not one of those fragrances like, opium for women, where you're going to just get this huge, every time you'll be able to smell yourself every time you move. That's not this kind of fragrance at all. It is, it's very quiet, and it's very close to the skin, and it turns into a skin scent relatively quickly. I would say within about an hour, it turns into a skin scent quickly. Now you can smell it this is, like I said, 45 minutes old, and I can easily still smell it. But it's one of those muted fragrances. It's a fragrance that's why I think this would be perfect for the office, or perfect for sort of an older gentleman that doesn't need to announce his presence like, some 20-year-olds want to be brash and harsh, and they want the girl from across the room to smell them, when they walk in. This is more for someone who has a little bit of experience, someone who knows that you don't need the girl to smell you from across the room. You want her to smell you when she gets into your bubble, when she gets into your airspace, right? And that's more what this fragrance is. That's why I think that This fragrance is more suited for a mature gentleman, but Rich Mitch is spot on when he says it is a very quiet scent. It absolutely is, 100%. And what's interesting, though, is actually I wore it today as my scent of the day. I got a compliment. I got a, "Oh, wow, you smell good." I said, "Really? You can smell that?" Because I was like, what is this? And so that brings me to the next point, which is because of all of the synthetics in this perfume, and ISOE Super makes many people feel anosmic or nose blind to a fragrance whenever they wear fragrances that have heavy ISOE Super contents in them, and other synthetics as well. But ISOE Super specifically is one that I know makes many people anosmic to. It's supposed to give off the cedar-like smell, the ISOE Super, but it also adds a little bit of throw to the perfume. Not as bad as Ambroxan, but it does add a little bit of throw. And, you know, you may be sitting here going, "Man, this fragrance is gone." But as soon as someone walks into your bubble, they'll be able to smell it because they're picking up the change, the difference. They're not smelling it all day like you are. And so, like I said, it's one where I think other people will smell it on you long after you stop smelling it on yourself, if that makes sense. And so 5 hours or so is about as long as I got, although I do reapply. I mean, for me in my collection, it's not like I'm going to run out of perfume or anything, right? So even with this much left, however much this is, 20 mils, 25 mils, 10 mils, I have no clue. But I'm not shy on the trigger, and I've already reapplied this once today. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things. Now, as the fragrance continues to dry, it opens up, okay, more and more. So that medicinal green, basically what the perfume is, if you want the Cliff Notes version, is it's a medicinal green, incensey, creamy, milky, woody fragrance. That's the way I would describe it, okay? And the lavender, like I said, not as evident in the opening. You almost feel the presence of the lavender. And it's not like you can smell the lavender out, or at least I can't. I might even be hard-pressed picking out the lavender, picking out that there's even lavender in this. And like I said, I think the dose of ISOE Super creates that masculine, woody, cedar-like smell that is associated with modern masculinity. I think that it makes many people anosmic to the way that this fragrance smells from time to time. So other people will be able to smell you long after you stop smelling it. And so one other point that I have to make is, so here's basically the note listing. Cypress and lavender in the top, cedarwood, patchouli, and frankincense in the heart, with okumi wood, gray musk, and sandalwood in the base, okay? Now, that frankincense in the heart doesn't smell like a traditional Arabic, or let's just say churchy incense. Like if you're expecting something like this from the frankincense, this is Avignon, one of the greatest incense fragrances of all time, created by Comme des Garcons, created by the great Bertrand Duchaufour. I really do love this fragrance. This was a very generous price given to me by Galen. He easily could have charged me more, but he gave that to me at a very, very fair price. So thank you, Galen. But the incense, or the frankincense in Gucci Rush for Men, is almost like the fragrance itself. It's muted in a way, but it's twisted a little bit in that, to my nose, it doesn't smell like traditional church incense. Or traditional frankincense. What it smells like is it's almost like you took the heartwood of like a cypress tree and you burned the wood itself. Okay, so the wood of the cypress, or let's say the cedar, let's say a cedar tree or cypress tree was being burnt, right? And of course there's going to be smoke, and that smoke that comes from the wood itself, the vibes that you get off of that. Obviously, there is a smoky facet to burning a piece of wood, but it doesn't smell necessarily like traditional proper frankincense, right? That's what came to my mind as I was sort of thinking about the way that the frankincense in this fragrance smells. There's a frankincense note listed, but it almost feels more like you're smelling just a burning piece of wood itself. And the smoky incense vibes come off of that burning piece of wood, and that makes it smell different than just normal frankincense. It almost smells like a, you know what it smells like? It almost smells like a safer, cleaner papyrus, if that makes sense, right? So papyrus usually has this very earthy, deep feel to it. This almost smells like a cleaner, lighter papyrus. And the fragrance is very dry, especially in the opening. It's a very dry, woody fragrance that sort of settles into this very tart, green, woody perfume that has a very musky base. So they say gray musk, which honestly, I read all these musks and it's like, they say gray musk and black musk and white musk and this musk, and I even saw like a blue musk. And a lot of times all I can think when I read those is some sort of synthetic musk creation by Givaudan or IFF or whatever it is. But there is a gray musk accord, whatever that means in here. But it's a nice musky dry down. Actually, I've smelled the synthetic musks thanks to Russian Atom, or some of them. And even some of the synthetic deer musk and stuff like that, I don't mind. I don't mind the synthetic side of it. Nothing can recreate the beauty of real musk, but you can't expect that from some of these synthetic musk molecules. Here, they've done a very good job. And the fragrance over time becomes milkier. Okay, so it becomes softer, but it also becomes milkier and creamier and more transparent. And so if you actually take a look at the bottle and you can see the transparent feel of it, it's a good representation of what happens to that sandalwood note as it sort of begins to calm down on the skin, if you will. And that sort of takes me to this love-hate relationship that I have with the bottle, because the bottle itself is, like I said at the beginning, it's almost like this clean iPod, you know, this is 2000, right? A new millennium. And so you have to give it to Tom Ford for coming out with something like this. I think this is a cool little creation that he made. On one hand, it looks very youthful, but on the other hand, it doesn't smell youthful to me. This fragrance smells more like it would be for a mature man. If you don't look at the bottle, if you just blindfold yourself and spray it on, you know, it has a bit of this season. It has like a man who's been seasoned, if you will. Somebody who has seen a couple seasons come and go, right? Someone that has some lines around their eyes. They've seen a few things. You know, they're not fresh out of the oven. And so this has that sort of, because maybe it's the cypress, maybe it's that traditional dry, woody type smell. And it doesn't have, the other thing is, it doesn't have any of the modern bubblegummy sweetness, which so many masculine fragrances in the next couple decades after this ended up coming out with, right? And so maybe that's the reason I associate this with a more mature, wiser gentleman who isn't wearing shit like that. But there's sort of this give and take, because, you know, on one hand, the bottle gives you sort of a good idea, I think, of what the fragrance smells like. This milky, creamy sandalwood from the white color here, the transparent, you know, light bits of the fragrance, which the fragrance does feel like it gets more transparent as it continues to dry. But then on the other hand, you look at this and you think, man, this is going to be a fragrance for a 20-year-old or even a high school kid, but it's not. I mean, I think a high school kid or a 20-year-old could easily wear this, but I think just if you blindfolded me, my intuition is 40. This is like a 40-year-old man. And, you know, someone who has maybe has a couple gray hairs in his beard, right? But he's still young enough to get down, something like that. That's the feeling of Gucci Rush for Men to me. And so the other thing I should mention that I found interesting in sort of researching this fragrance, if you will, is there's a note in Parfumo, and I don't know if it's just I didn't look at any of the other you know, databases, because I have always been a fan of Parfumo, and I just usually will just stick to them. But there's a note of a wood called Okoume wood, Okoume, Okoume wood. And Okoume wood has properties that they say are antiseptic, and almost like antibacterial, like medicinal in nature. So I mentioned the cypress tree having some medicinal properties as well. Well, apparently this Okoume wood which also I think creates this oil known as hinoki oil, which there are some fragrances that you will see that hinoki note, I believe. But okumi wood has this sort of sterile, they've done experiments where the okumi wood itself is actually antibacterial, antimicrobial, all of this type of thing, right? So it goes along with this sort of sterile, this almost looks like you would expect to see this in a hospital or something, like this very clean, white, sterile, like it's been disinfected with Lysol and it's completely clean, straight out of the wrapping, you can touch it now, that kind of thing, right? And so you have to kind of give it to Tom Ford for creating a fragrance where he takes an idea and just pulls at the string over and over and over again and comes up with these different little marketing touches that match the fragrance and the notes that all sort of play off of each other and that sort of thing. And so I have to give it to him. I mean, for my least favorite of the three, I'm enjoying wearing it today. It's only the second time I've worn it as my scent of the day. I honestly don't think my feeling will change on this. People always ask me, and I always tell them price is subjective. Price is 100% subjective. If you have $2 million in the bank, spending $100 on this versus $300 versus $500 probably means nothing to you. But if for most of us who have to pay bills and live every day and that kind of thing, spending an extra $300 or $400 on a fragrance isn't in the cards every day, right? So everyone always asks me, is this worth it? Is this a good price? And usually I say, look, price is subjective. You have to decide for yourself if it's worth it. This is one, I'll tell you right now, it's not worth it. I don't think this is worth it at all, especially because, at least for me, now, I paid like 20 or 30 bucks for this. So this is definitely worth it for me to have in the collection. Thanks to my brother Cullen for procuring this for me. But the other reason I really don't think it's worth it is that this is out there. And this is called Azzaro Visit. Now, this is discontinued, if I understand right. But this is 100 and, what are you? Are you 120 mil? 100 mil. This is a 100 mil bottle, okay? And Azzaro Visit was created by the great Annick Menardo. And I'll do a review on this one of these days, but to me, they are unbelievably similar. This has a little bit more cardamom. This has that cypress note, which this doesn't have. This has the musky dry down, which this doesn't have. But this has some other things. And, for me, I get just as much pleasure out of wearing Azzaro Visit. In fact, if you're someone who likes to smell yourself, if you're someone who is sort of upset that Gucci Rush seems to disappear so quickly, Azzaro Visit lasts longer on the skin for me to smell. Now, maybe other people can still smell Gucci Rush for men, but, we're an hour in right now, an hour and 15 minutes in, and already it's very, very quiet, like my brother Rich Mitch said, and he's usually spot on, and we usually agree. So, for me, if I ever get the is it worth it question with Gucci Rush, the answer is no. Not unless you're like a collector or something along those lines. For the average person, I would say this is a no-go. If you're going to spend that much money on a discontinued Gucci fragrance, make it Gucci Envy for Men or Gucci Pour Homme from 2003, or the original Gucci Pour Homme from 1976 that no one talks about, which I'll review that as well one day. So, yeah, that's sort of my take on Gucci Rush for Men. Discontinued. I know there's a lot of people who maybe wore that fragrance in 2000 to 2010 or so for a decade, where they have some very happy memories with them. And, if that's the case and you have specific scent memories linked to this, nothing else will do. But for most people who think it's cool owning discontinued fragrances, I don't think the price tag is anywhere near worth it right now. Unless you can find, kind of like I did, a partial for a very, very reasonable price, I would just, say this is one that you could take a pass on or go for Azzaro Visit. So that's my take on Gucci Rush for Men. If you have experience with it, if you have thoughts on Gucci's discontinued line while Tom Ford was there, I love seeing your faces in the comments. I love responding to the comments. I love the interaction. I love making these videos for you guys. So, the fact that I can just get up here and talk about whatever the hell I want. I'm not chasing the newest release. Like, I almost feel sorry for some of these channels that are almost like, shackled to the new release bandwagon, where they have to put out a new fragrance video you know, as soon as the new Parfums de Marly fragrance come out, like, I'm out on that stuff. Like, if I ever get some juice or juice of a new fragrance, sometimes I talk about it, like I did with the new Le Labo Myrrh 55, which I don't really care about, but, you know, I'll talk about it. But otherwise, I just like to do whatever I want to do. And today I woke up and I said, you know what? I'm going to review Gucci Rush. And I think that's kind of cool that I can do that. And I can say whatever the hell I want about it. I don't have to worry about offending anybody. And if they do get offended, well, fuck them. So that's sort of my take on Gucci Rush. If you have any thoughts, comments, love seeing your faces in the comments. Like I said, we're still small enough that I can get back to every single one of you. So do leave me a message. Thank you for the support. To get the channel to where we're at nowadays, it's a pleasure and an honor to get to do these, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.